What if the most brilliant minds in human history were not just born that way? What if they were eating their way there? Buddhist monks produced some of the most sophisticated philosophy, mathematics, and medicine the ancient world had ever seen, in an era before caffeine culture, before Adderall, before the billion-dollar nootropic industry that now charges you $80 for a stack with a label full of promises and a formula full of filler. Here is something almost nobody in the modern cognitive health world talks about. The Charaka Samhita, one of the oldest surviving medical texts on Earth, has an entire dedicated category called Medhya Rasayana. Medhya means mind. Rasayana means rejuvenation. The ancient physicians were so precise about brain nutrition that they classified specific foods by their cognitive mechanism, not by taste, not by availability, by what they did inside the brain. And modern neuroscience is now running trials on these exact compounds. The results keep coming back the same. They were right. Stay with me, because number 9 on this list was administered to monastery students the night before examinations for over 1,000 years. And number 4 contains the compound that researchers now believe explains why India has the lowest Alzheimer's rates of any nation ever studied. 10 foods. 10 ways the ancient monks were building better brains long before neuroscience had a name for what they were doing. Let us get into it. Number 10. Lion's mane mushroom, the monk's mental architect. For over 1,000 years, lion's mane was a staple of Chinese Buddhist temple cooking, not because it tasted extraordinary, because the monks who consumed it regularly noticed something. Their minds worked differently during long meditation sessions. Clarity came faster. Concentration held longer. The Japanese Buddhist tradition called this mushroom yamabushitake, the herb of the mountain monks. It was prepared fresh in soups, specifically before extended periods of seated practice. Read that again slowly. They were cooking a cognitive enhancer into their meals before anyone had a language to explain what a cognitive enhancer was. That tells you everything about how lion's mane was valued. It was not a delicacy. It was a tool for the mind. Modern neuroscience has now identified exactly why it worked. Lion's mane contains 2 unique active compounds, hericenones and arenosines. Here is the key detail. These are the only known natural compounds on Earth that stimulate nerve growth factor synthesis inside a living brain. Nerve growth factor, or NGF, is the protein responsible for growing, maintaining, and repairing neurons. Without adequate NGF, your brain's neurons begin to atrophy. Slowly, silently, across decades. A 2009 double-blind, placebo-controlled trial published in Phytotherapy Research showed measurable cognitive improvement after 16 weeks of lion's mane consumption. The critical finding? When participants stopped consuming it, their scores declined. The benefit required consistent use, exactly as the monastery tradition prescribed. Before anyone had a word for neuroplasticity, Chinese Buddhist monks were cultivating it through a mushroom cooked in their daily soup. 3 ways to use it. Cook fresh lion's mane sautéed in ghee. This is the original monastery preparation and one of the most bioavailable forms. Take 500 milligrams of dried powder in warm tea daily, the minimum effective clinical dose. Stack it with Brahmi, the herb coming up at number 9, for a synergistic cognitive protocol the ancient kitchen was running a millennium before the supplement industry discovered either compound. The monks did not stumble onto lion's mane by accident. They observed it, confirmed it across generations, and embedded it into their daily rhythm. Number 9. Brahmi. Also known as Bacopa Monieri, the memory rebuilder. The Charaka Samhita does not hedge on this one. It classifies Brahmi as the number 1 Medhya Rasayana, the premier brain herb in the entire Ayurvedic pharmacopoeia. Not one of the best, the best. And there is a specific tradition that illustrates exactly how seriously the ancient physicians took this classification. Before monastery examinations, the oral recitations where students were expected to reproduce thousands of lines of Sanskrit scripture from memory without a single error, Brahmi was administered. Not as a suggestion, as a protocol. The teachers understood that this herb did something specific to the brain's ability to retain and recall information. They had been observing this across centuries. Read that again slowly. They were prescribing a memory-enhancing compound the night before high-stakes examinations over 1,000 years ago. That tells you everything about how Brahmi was valued. It was not a wellness supplement. It was academic infrastructure. Modern neuroscience explains the mechanism with precision. Brahmi's active compounds are bacchosides A and B. What they do is remarkable. They physically repair damaged dendrites, the branching extensions of neurons through which memory signals travel, and they promote new synaptic branching in healthy neurons. This is not figurative enhancement. It is structural repair of the brain's physical architecture. 12 double-blind clinical trials confirm this across multiple institutions. Improved memory recall, improved processing speed, measurable reduction in anxiety. The institutional validation the ancient physicians never needed because they had 1,000 years of direct observation on living students. Before anyone had a word for synaptic plasticity, Ayurvedic physicians were rebuilding it with a small green plant. 3 ways to use it. Take Brahmi with fat, with ghee or full-fat milk. Bacchosides are fat-soluble, and absorption without fat is significantly reduced. Use it consistently for a minimum of 8 to 12 weeks before evaluating the effect. Clinical trials show the full structural repair requires this window. Combine it with lion's mane for a dual NGF and synaptic repair protocol that mirrors the layered approach the monastery kitchen was already using. Brahmi does not work like a stimulant. It works like a construction crew, quietly rebuilding the architecture of memory while you live your life. Number 8. Saffron. Called kumkuma in Sanskrit, the golden antidepressant. Saffron traveled the Silk Road for over 2,000 years. It was worth more than gold by weight in certain markets along the route. And Tibetan Buddhist physicians, who had simultaneous access to medicine from China, India, and the Islamic world, chose to use it for one specific condition above almost all others. They called it sadness of the mind and heaviness of spirit. The text described patients who could not meditate, could not concentrate, could not engage in study or devotion. Not because of physical illness, because their minds had gone dark. And the prescription was saffron, steeped in warm water, a specific number of threads, every day for as long as the heaviness persisted. Read that again slowly. Tibetan physicians were prescribing an antidepressant protocol with specific compound, specific preparation, and specific duration over 1,000 years before the pharmaceutical class of antidepressants was invented. That tells you everything about how saffron was valued. It was not a spice. It was psychiatric medicine. Modern clinical trials have now run the comparison the ancient physicians could not. 6 randomized controlled trials, published in peer-reviewed psychiatry journals, compared saffron directly against SSR, including Prozac and Zoloft. The finding: saffron performed equivalently for mild to moderate depression, with dramatically fewer side effects. The active compound is crocin. It modulates serotonin and dopamine reuptake simultaneously, a dual pathway action that no pharmaceutical antidepressant achieves without significant side effect burden. And here's the detail that almost nobody mentions. Crocin is only bioavailable in water-based preparations, not fat-based. The ancient prescription of warm water, not milk, was chemically precise. Before anyone had a word for serotonin, Tibetan physicians were regulating it with a flower. 3 ways to use it. Steep 15 threads in warm water for 10 minutes and drink in the morning. This is the clinically validated dose used in the trials. Never use milk as the base for medicinal saffron. Crocin is not fat-soluble, and the bioavailability is significantly reduced. Use it daily for a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks. The trial timelines mirror the monastery prescription window exactly. Saffron is not a seasoning. It is the world's oldest, clinically validated, natural antidepressant. Number 7. Walnuts, the brain-shaped brain food. This is the entry on this list that the ancient physicians got right for the wrong reason, and modern science confirmed for the right one. The Ayurvedic texts note that walnuts resemble the brain and therefore strengthen the brain. The doctrine of signatures, the idea that a food's shape reveals its medicinal target, is not rigorous science, but in this case it led to one of the most accurate dietary recommendations in the ancient record. Because walnuts do strengthen the brain, just not because of their shape. Here is the mechanism. Walnuts are the richest whole food source of ALA omega-3 fatty acids of any nut or seed. ALA converts in the body to EPA and DHA, the omega-3 fatty acids that form the structural membrane of every neuron in the brain. Without adequate DHA, neuronal membranes become rigid and less efficient at transmitting signals. The brain, literally, becomes less responsive. A 2020 study from UCLA, analyzing data from over 20,000 adults, found that walnut consumers scored measurably higher on every cognitive test administered. Not slightly higher, measurably higher, across every category. And here is the detail almost nobody mentions. The clinical dose is 7 walnuts per day. Not a handful, not a cup. 7. The ancient prescription of eating them daily as a regular food, not as an occasional snack, is exactly right. Before anyone had a word for neuronal membrane integrity, Ayurvedic physicians were protecting it through a nut that happens to look like a brain. 3 ways to use it. Eat 7 walnuts daily. The exact dose reflected in the UCLA cohort data. Consume them with a fat-soluble nutrient like turmeric. The combination enhances omega-3 utilization and adds the neuroprotective curcumin benefit in a single preparation. Store them in the refrigerator. Walnut oils oxidize quickly, and rancid omega-3 fats produce the opposite cognitive effect of what you are after. The shape was a coincidence. The medicine was not. Number 6. Shankpushpi, Convolvulus pluricalis, the forgotten Alzheimer's herb. Among all the herbs on this list, Shankpushpi has the oldest and most consistent documentary record. It appears across multiple separate Sanskrit texts, referenced not once, not twice, but consistently and repeatedly across generations of Ayurvedic scholarship. And the ancient classification is precise. This herb was not prescribed for general wellness. It was prescribed specifically for memory loss, for inability to concentrate, for what the ancient texts describe as the mind that slips away. In monastery settings, it was given to elderly monks whose recall was fading, a deliberate attempt to preserve the cognitive function required for continued study and spiritual practice. The monks observed something the pharmaceutical industry is only now arriving at. Read that again slowly. They were treating age-related cognitive decline with a plant targeting the specific biochemical pathway over 1,500 years before Alzheimer's disease was named. That tells you everything about how Shankpushpi was valued. It was not an herbal memory aid. It was the monastery's anti-dementia protocol. Modern neuroscience has identified the mechanism. The alkaloids and flavonoids in Shankpushpi inhibit acetylcholinesterase, the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine in the synapse after it has done its job. Acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter of memory and learning. In Alzheimer's disease, acetylcholine levels collapse. The pharmaceutical drugs currently approved for Alzheimer's, including donepezil and rivastigmine, work by exactly this mechanism, acetylcholinesterase inhibition. Shankpushpi is now being studied in direct comparison with these pharmaceutical drugs. Before anyone had a word for acetylcholinesterase, Ayurvedic physicians were inhibiting it with a flowering vine. 3 ways to use it. Take the fresh juice of the plant in the morning on an empty stomach. The classical monastery preparation and most bioavailable form. Use standardized powder or extract, widely available and well tolerated with a long safety record. Combine with Brahmi for a dual acetylcholine and synaptic repair protocol. This pairing appears in multiple ancient texts as a prescribed combination, not as individual herbs used separately. The pharmaceutical industry calls this mechanism a breakthrough in Alzheimer's treatment. The monastery called it Tuesday. We are halfway through this list. Every item from here forward goes deeper into the science than what you have heard so far. If this is landing for you, subscribe right now. We post every single week, and every video goes further than the last. Now, number 5, black seed, Nigella sativa, called Krishna Charaka in Sanskrit, the Silk Road mind drug. This herb sits at an extraordinary intersection of history. It was documented in Buddhist medical texts. It was documented in Islamic medical texts. Both traditions traveled the Silk Road, and both arrived independently at the same conclusion about this small black seed. The Prophet Muhammad's endorsement that it is a remedy for every disease except death is the most widely quoted. But the Buddhist medical tradition documented it with equal conviction, specifically for its effects on the mind and nervous system. Monks who consumed it daily reported clearer concentration during long sessions of seated meditation. The Ayurvedic and Buddhist texts describe it as a protector of the nervous system, a food that keeps the mind from deteriorating under the pressure of time. And modern neuroscience has now identified the mechanism that explains both traditions' observations. The primary active compound in black seed is thymoquinone. Here is the key detail that almost nobody mentions. Thymoquinone has been shown in multiple published clinical trials to regenerate neurons in the hippocampus, the brain's primary memory center, after oxidative damage. Not protect neurons from future damage, regenerate neurons that have already been damaged. This is an extraordinarily rare property in any natural compound. The same compound also reduces neuroinflammation through pathways that are currently the focus of leading Alzheimer's research institutions across the United States and Europe. It is simultaneously a neurotrophic agent and an anti-neuroinflammatory. Two separate mechanisms, one small seed. Before anyone had a word for hippocampal neurogenesis, Buddhist and Islamic physicians were promoting it through the same daily practice, in the same small seed, on the same ancient road. 3 ways to use it. Take 1 teaspoon of cold-pressed black seed oil daily, not heated, not blended, not diluted. Add whole seeds to food. This is exactly how the ancient physicians consumed them, as a daily, non-negotiable, not a therapeutic course. Use it with consistency over months. The hippocampal regeneration data comes from studies using daily supplementation over extended periods, exactly mirroring the monastery daily practice. 2 civilizations, 1 seed, the same conclusion. Across 1,200 years of parallel observation, that is not coincidence. Number 4, turmeric with fat, the Alzheimer's killer. This entry requires a distinction that the modern supplement industry almost universally gets wrong. Turmeric is not the medicine. Curcumin delivered in fat is the medicine. The Charaka Samhita specifies this with unusual precision. For mental conditions, for what the ancient texts describe as fog of the mind, loss of clarity, deterioration of memory with age, turmeric was always prescribed in fat-based preparations, ghee, full-fat milk, sesame oil. Never in water, never in isolation. The ancient physicians had observed something that took modern pharmacology 2,000 years to confirm in a laboratory. Curcumin is fat-soluble. Without fat as a carrier, it passes through the digestive system largely unabsorbed. More critically, it cannot cross the blood-brain barrier without a fat-based vehicle. The brain is the destination. Fat is the delivery system. And the clinical data on what happens when curcumin reaches the brain is among the most significant findings in modern geroscience. Curcumin reduces amyloid plaque formation. Amyloid plaques are the defining pathological hallmark of Alzheimer's disease, the protein aggregates that accumulate in the brain for decades before a single symptom appears. Read that again slowly. The compound that ancient Buddhist physicians were prescribing specifically for mental deterioration, in fat, with precision, for cognitive conditions, reduces the exact protein aggregation that causes the most feared brain disease on Earth. India, where turmeric consumption in fat-based preparations has been the daily practice for millennia, has the lowest recorded Alzheimer's rates of any nation in any large-scale study. Before anyone had a word for amyloid plaques, Ayurvedic physicians were clearing the conditions that form them with a spice, delivered correctly, every single day. 3 ways to use it. Always take turmeric in ghee, full-fat dairy, or coconut oil. The fat is not a preference, it is the mechanism. Always combine with black pepper. Piperine increases curcumin bioavailability by 2,000%. These 2 ingredients should never be separated. Use it daily. The neuroprotective data comes from long-term, consistent consumption, which is exactly how the monastery used it, not as a treatment, as a daily food. The supplement industry sells you turmeric capsules in water-soluble powder form. The monks had better chemistry. Number 3. Gotu kola, Centella asiatica, called Mandukaparni in Sanskrit, the 3-leaf protocol. The Charaka Samhita describes Gotu kola as the premier herb for intelligence and longevity of the brain. But the instruction that appears in the ancient Sri Lankan Buddhist chronicles is startlingly specific. Buddhist monks in Sri Lanka, where Gotu kola was consumed as a daily food for centuries, ate 3 leaves. Not a handful, not a cup of tea, 3 leaves every day. This level of precision is unusual in ancient medical texts. Most herbal prescriptions give a range of doses. Gotu kola prescriptions do not. 3 leaves daily for life. The monk Nandasena, documented in the Sri Lankan Buddhist chronicles, reportedly lived past 114 years. His daily non-negotiable? 3 Gotu kola leaves from the plant growing beside the monastery wall. Read that again slowly. A centenarian monk, a single precise herb, the same dose, every day for over a century. That tells you everything about how Gotu kola was valued. It was not a wellness practice. It was a longevity intervention executed with pharmaceutical precision. Modern analysis reveals why the specific dose mattered. The primary active compound is asiaticoside. At the dose delivered by 3 fresh leaves, asiaticoside activates collagen synthesis in cerebral blood vessels, measurably improving microcirculation to the brain. It simultaneously promotes collagen in joints and skin. But the cerebral microcirculation effect is what matters for cognitive longevity. 4 randomized controlled trials in elderly populations show measurable improvement in cognitive function after consistent Gotu kola use. And here is the critical detail almost nobody mentions. More is not better. Higher doses saturate the collagen synthesis pathway without increasing the cognitive benefit. The 3-leaf prescription was not tradition handed down without understanding. It was precision dosing arrived at through centuries of direct clinical observation. Before anyone had a word for cerebral microcirculation, Buddhist monks were optimizing it with exactly 3 leaves. 3 ways to use it. Eat 3 fresh leaves daily. The original preparation and the most bioavailable delivery method if the plant is accessible. Use 500 milligrams of standardized extract if fresh leaves are unavailable. This approximates the active compound profile of 3 leaves. Take it as a longevity practice over months and years. The cognitive benefits are cumulative and build with consistent use, exactly as the ancient prescription specified. The monks were not guessing at 3 leaves. They had arrived at a dose through observation that modern pharmacokinetics is now confirming. Number 2. Amla. Called amalaki in Sanskrit, Indian gooseberry, the heat-proof brain shield. The Charaka Samhita makes a statement about amla that it makes about no other food in the entire pharmacopoeia. It calls amla the best of all rejuvenating foods, not one of the best, the best. And it repeats this designation across multiple separate chapters. That repetition is not accidental. It is emphasis. The ancient physicians were making sure future generations understood the hierarchy clearly. Amla sits at the top. Here is the scene that illustrates how that value was applied. Ayurvedic physicians traveling with the armies and caravans of the Maurya Empire, which stretched from Afghanistan to Bengal, carried dried amla above almost any other provision. When soldiers fell ill, when nutrition became scarce across weeks of travel through depleted terrain, when the mind began to fail under prolonged physical stress and caloric restriction. Amla was the first intervention. Not because it was the most available food, because it was specifically understood to protect the brain and nervous system under conditions of extreme demand. Read that again slowly. That tells you everything about how amla was valued. It was not a fruit. It was emergency neuroprotection in a portable, shelf-stable form. Modern analysis explains every aspect of that ancient decision. Amla contains imblicinins A and B, vitamin C precursors with one property that is extraordinarily rare among all vitamin C sources in nature. They are heat-stable. Almost all vitamin C, in citrus, in berries, in peppers, degrades significantly when exposed to heat, cooking, or prolonged storage. Amla's imblicinins survive cooking, drying, and months of storage with their potency largely intact. A single fresh amla delivers vitamin C activity equivalent to 20 oranges. The tannins in amla also directly inhibit acetylcholinesterase, the same enzyme targeted by pharmaceutical Alzheimer's drugs. And its antioxidant capacity, measured on the ORAC scale, is 17 times higher than blueberries. Before anyone had a word for neuroprotection, Ayurvedic armies were carrying it across subcontinents in a dried berry that fit in the palm of one hand. 3 ways to use it. Eat 1 fresh amla daily if it is accessible. This is the ancient daily non-negotiable that the texts repeat without exception. Take Chyawanprash, the classical prepared amla paste, as the traditional alternative when fresh fruit is unavailable. This is how it was preserved and distributed across the entire subcontinent. Combine with Brahmi for a complete acetylcholinesterase inhibition and structural neural repair stack. The 2 most powerful brain foods in the Ayurvedic canon, paired precisely for that reason. The Charaka Samhita called amla the best. Modern science is finishing the sentence. Number 1. Sesame seeds, called tila in Sanskrit, the neuroinflammation blocker. This is the entry on this list that will surprise the most people, because sesame seeds do not appear in any modern nootropic stack. They are not featured in any cognitive supplement marketed to the biohacking community. They are sitting in your kitchen right now, in a container that probably has not been opened in weeks. And the monks who maintained complete mental clarity into their 80s and 90s, who memorized tens of thousands of lines of scripture across decades, consumed them every single day. Not occasionally, every day. The Ashtanga Hridayam, one of the 3 foundational texts of Ayurveda, classifies sesame as the premier longevity food across all categories. Not the premier grain, the premier longevity food, period. Buddhist monks consumed sesame paste, sesame oil, and sesame seeds in rice as a daily practice for thousands of years, not as a condiment, as medicine, delivered in food. Here is the mechanism that explains everything. Sesame's primary active compound is sesamin, a lignin with a very specific and consequential biochemical target. Sesamin inhibits delta-5 desaturase, the enzyme responsible for converting omega-6 fatty acid precursors into arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is the primary substrate for neuroinflammation. And here's the connection that ties this entire list together. Chronic, low-grade neuroinflammation. Inflammation inside the brain that produces no dramatic symptoms but accumulates across decades is now the leading biological hypothesis for the mechanism underlying depression, cognitive decline, and Alzheimer's disease. By blocking the enzyme that produces the substrate for neuroinflammation, sesamin keeps the brain in a continuously anti-inflammatory state. Read that again slowly. Before anyone had a word for neuroinflammation, Buddhist monks were blocking it at the enzymatic source through a daily food that they treated as seriously as any medicine in their pharmacy. And here is the detail almost nobody mentions. Black sesame seeds have significantly higher sesamin concentration than white sesame. The ancient texts that prescribe sesame for longevity specify black sesame. They were right about the color. 3 ways to use it. Use black sesame paste, called kurogoma in Japanese Buddhist cooking, as a daily food preparation, not a condiment. Add black sesame seeds to rice, soups, and porridge. The classical monastery preparation that made this a dietary staple rather than an occasional ingredient. Use cold-pressed black sesame oil added to food after cooking. Heat reduces the sesamin content, so the ancient practice of adding oil after preparation was not only culturally correct, but biochemically precise. The monks were not eating sesame for flavor. They were eating it to keep the fire of their own neuroinflammation from burning their minds down from the inside. Quietly, consistently, for a lifetime. The monks who memorized tens of thousands of lines of scripture, who maintained complete mental clarity into their 80s and 90s, who produced some of the most sophisticated philosophy and science the ancient world had ever seen. They were not simply meditating their way to cognitive health. They were eating with precision. Every item on this list has a mechanism.
Every mechanism has now been confirmed in peer-reviewed clinical trials. And not one of these foods cost $80 a month. Not one requires a prescription. Not one was invented in a laboratory. The monks understood something the modern cognitive health industry would prefer you forget. The brain is not separate from what you feed it. It is built from what you feed it. These 10 foods were not chosen at random. They were the result of thousands of years of systematic observation in communities large enough to produce meaningful data. I will leave you with this. The monastery kitchen was a neuroscience laboratory. It just did not look like one. Drop a comment below and tell me which food surprised you most.